Welcome to Stars Launch Pod, where we chat with innovators who are overcoming challenges, pushing boundaries, and collaborating to make space more accessible and sustainable for humanity, one launch at a time.
It's one small step for man.
Here's your host, Susan Wise.
Welcome to Stars Launch Pod, Space, Technology, and Research Sciences, brought to you by starsciences.org, where we connect, collaborate, and accelerate. I'm your host, Susan Wise, and joining us this time is Adam Oswald, an architect and engineer who just launched a design startup that's working to bring human-centered design to space and space engineering down to Earth. I'd like to know a lot more about that. Welcome to the podcast, Adam. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Thanks for having me.
Tell us more about what you're working on and what you're doing to, further the space industry.
Yeah, sure. So I should probably start with like a little bit of background because I'm obviously coming to space from a little bit of an odd place. I've been a fan of space my whole life since I was a kid. I'm a little too young to have watched, the Apollo landings. So my experience growing up was watching the shuttle program and seeing ISS get built. So like this idea of people going to space and building things in space has essentially been routine for my entire life. Now, I've had a lot of different interests throughout my life and, went a lot of different directions. I studied music and political science and did a lot of different things and eventually fell into architecture, which I found fit my skills, fit my interests, and kind of satisfied my generalist tendencies. Fast forward a few years from that, and commercial space is really starting to take off. And so suddenly there's, a ton of excitement around the space industry that's brand new. And I start feeling this sense of, kind of fear of missing out, but also kind of oddly in a position to maybe contribute in a unique way. So I took a turn and went back to school again, this human space flight. Got a job at Blue Origin, kind of went the more traditional-ish engineering route. I did a mix of life support engineering and a little bit of space architecture. So I did that for a little over 3 years. So now what I'm doing is I'm trying to work a little more explicitly at the intersection of architecture and aerospace to do, like you said, bring kind of the best of what we do on Earth when it comes to human-centered design all the way up to space, and then take the best of what we know about space engineering and bring it back down to Earth. So we launched this firm. It's called the Space Age. And what we do is we try to work with either mission-driven companies or institutions or even individual innovators to try to design and build high-performance architecture, whether it's on Earth or in space. And so that's kind of the idea of what the thing is about and what we try to do.
Do you mean like as in structures, like places to live? Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, you can kind of think of it in two parts. And this is just the hazard of working like in this thing that's not quite in either industries. So like one is with aerospace companies, we can help with design concepts to human integration, really whatever is needed to improve crew experience in space habitats. And that could mean vehicles, it could mean space stations, it could mean surface habitats. The other piece of it is you think space industry and you think, stuff flying up into space, but really most of the space industry exists on Earth. So there are real needs of construction, of facilities, of office space, of industrial manufacturing, labs. Most of that industry occurs here. But to be able to do that stuff well, to be able to, actually support the architectural needs of those companies, having a really good idea of what's actually going into space and what is needed for that is really helpful.
Right. That makes sense. I mean, because obviously a space habitat would look and be a lot different than something, that you build here on Earth.
That's right.
What was one of your big aha moments during this?
Yeah. So I think I've had, in the last 10 years or so, probably two big aha moments. The first one was when I realized that space architecture was a real job, because it doesn't sound like it, right? It sounds like something from the Jetsons.
Right.
But it's a real field, and there's a community of practitioners, and it's been around for a couple of decades now. And kind of figuring this out when I was working in, regular architecture in LA was kind of what pushed me to pursue a career in the space industry. The second aha moment has really just been in the last few years, and it hasn't been more a single moment. It's been more like this accumulation of smaller puzzle pieces that kind of have slowly fallen into place. So the story I tend to tell is like people going to space is hard. You always hear people say that space is hard.
Yeah.
And sending people is, harder. But the way we've designed for people to go to space has always kind of stemmed from this good enough mentality, right? So there's this engineering joke. I don't know if you've heard it. Basically, it's anybody can design a bridge that'll stand up, but it takes an engineer to design a bridge that'll barely stand up. So
Okay.
this is how engineers think about human spaceflight, right? Humans are a subsystem. That's what I was
Hmm.
taught. They're a box you're going to plug into the other systems, right? So the accommodations are Spartan. Ultimately, the people are subservient to these complex machines that we're shooting off into space. So they'll
Hmm.
keep you alive and they'll keep you, for the most part, healthy, but just barely. So,
Right.
and even then, there are like real consequences for the physical and psychological health of the people who go. And we've tried to mitigate this, over the years by really carefully selecting the healthiest, best educated, most capable people that we can find to go become astronauts. And then on top of that, we spend a lot of time and money training them to go operate these systems, right? So it's not human centered, it's not human friendly. We kind of force the fit. But
True.
now that commercial space is starting to become a little more mainstream, we're starting to see, more people, a great diversity of people traveling to space and often for
Hmm.
longer. There's this trend that we're starting to see of easier, cheaper space flight and spacefarers that are going to expect more from their built environment. So all of a sudden, architects who are experts at designing the built environment have a lot of value to add and an important role to play, as space habitats are not just about surviving, but thriving.
Right. Wow. Well, that's interesting. And it is kind of amazing. It's kind of cool. I find it interesting that there's so many different industries that can cross over into the space industry. You don't even realize it, not just architecture, but, you know, we've got to be able to grow food. We've got to be able to do a lot, take care of ourselves. Medical, all these different things cross over into the space industry. And you don't even realize it.
And it starts to accelerate, like as inhabiting space starts to look more like inhabiting Earth. You're going to start to
Hmm.
need all that. You need much more than just the backpack full of stuff you take to survive for a couple of weeks and then come back. That's the slow burn aha moment of kind of going, oh, hey, this is a thing that it's going to change. Like going into the future,
Hmm.
it's maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but at some point in the near future, we're going to have this shift where, going to space, commercial space,
Hmm.
starts to look less like test pilots and more like commercial airlines. And at that point, we're going to need much different accommodations and much different, just what we're providing to those people that's in line with what they expect from that experience.
What's your biggest challenge?
My biggest challenge has been, let's say, threading this needle of doing architecture and design in an industry that historically has not had or really needed either. So, like I've been saying, the history of people going to space, it's been rooted in exploration. It's going places for the first time. The early astronauts were test pilots, all of them. And, despite everything I've been talking about, we're really not there yet. Where going to space, it like is an ordinary routine experience. But architecture and like design is all about ordinary life. It's about the houses we live in and the offices where we work and the coffee shops we stop into. It's about making daily life easier and more comfortable and more intuitive. So there's this disconnect still between kind of these two things, between like the architecture design side and the spaceflight side.
You can
Like I
bring
said,
those two things together. That's what you're
yes,
trying to
exactly.
do here.
That's what
Okay.
I'm trying to do, and it's starting to change. We're getting there.
Mhm.
It's slow progress, but I haven't overcome it yet. Right? It's still a work in progress, and a big piece of doing the work I end up doing, working in space architecture, is educational. It's talking to anybody who will listen, and a lot of people who won't, about what space architecture is and how it can help solve problems, and what the value could be if there were a greater adoption.
You have, mock-ups of these things, and, is it I mean, I don't know, is this something that you can create and take and show, and so people can see it and think, "Okay, this might be doable."
Yeah, you can do mock-ups, and people do. Um,
Mhm.
I mean, you can do a lot of things, right? You can do mock-ups, you can show renderings, you can show models.
Yeah.
It's still a tough case to make because
Yeah.
we're still in the place of the operational needs. So being able
Uh-huh.
to demonstrate the value of design in terms of productivity or in terms of comfort or in terms of human
Mhm.
health, um, that's kind of the space of the argument right now, where it's still not just anybody. It's still not you and me just buying a ticket to go to space. Uh, so until then, when the market says yes, this is something we really, really need, go get to work. We got to make the case a little bit still for why design matters and the value it can add.
Well, you'll be one step ahead. because you're starting now, and it's going to happen. If it's not a matter of if, it's when, and being ready and moving forward so that when they're ready for this, you've got these designs and these ideas.
Exactly. Yeah.
What piece of advice would you like to share with our listeners today?
Yeah. So I hear from students pretty often.
Hmm.
They're in high school or college, and usually it's one of two things. It's engineering majors interested in space habitats, or architecture students who are interested in the space industry. And so the piece of advice I like to share with them is actually advice that I got when I was starting out, like 10 years ago or something.
Hmm.
Um, and so basically, when I started out, somebody gave me this advice of, if you want to be a space architect, you have to choose between working as an engineer at a space company, where very occasionally you get to do an architecture project, or working as an architect who very occasionally will get to do a space project. And that's really to say, a generation ago, being a space architect really wasn't a job yet.
Right.
Today, things aren't that different. I worked at Blue Origin on 2 different flight
Mhm.
programs, and 90% of my time there was in a traditional engineering job, for which
Okay.
my background in architecture was just not necessary. Um, so in a lot of ways, it's still a fledgling field, and there's still that choice you're going to have to make. Now, the caveat I add to that advice that I got is kind of the story I've been telling you today, that things are starting to change. We're starting to
Yeah.
shift a little bit. We're starting to move in this direction a little more clearly. And this need for architects and designers working in this industry are going to start to become a lot more clear as we get closer to that place. There's an
Mhm.
inflection point somewhere. So it's just a matter of, when is that going to happen? What can we do to prepare for that? So that's the advice I like to give in terms of like a resource. It's a little more concrete for people. I am part of the professional group I mentioned before. It's the Space Architecture Technical Committee of the AIAA. And we have a website, spacearchitect.org, and that's got this huge collection of like technical papers and news coming from the field, and a list of members you can contact, and even a page dedicated to pathways into space architecture. So I like to point people to that.
Okay.
And then also, I'm a pretty good resource. I feel these questions a
Now,
lot, so feel free
now,
to reach out to me.
and you
Uh,
worked on the Artemis program in some ways.
that's right. Yeah, about half my
Yeah.
time at Blue was working
Okay.
on that lander.
Do you have a passion project, past or present, that you'd like to mention?
Yeah, so unfortunately, my life is singular at the moment, which is kind of unusual for me. I usually have multiple things happening, but right now I'm kind of all space architecture all the time. So actually, with that group I was talking about, the SATC, we are working on basically what's called a decadal survey for space architecture. So if you've heard of decadal surveys, they're associated with these big efforts around planetary science or heliophysics or astronomy, other space sciences, and they're run by the national academies to kind of survey the state of the field and collectively chart out the course of what they want to prioritize, how they want to spend their effort and money over the coming decade. So like all the big space missions you've heard of, the science missions,
Right.
Juno, Cassini, everything that's taking a huge amount of effort, does a bunch of science, has clear science goals, like it's coming from those. So we are borrowing that framework a little bit, not associated with the national academies, but we're kind of stealing from them to say, look, we want to do the same thing, but with the field of space architecture. Like I said, it's been around for about 20 years formally. So it seemed like a good time to kind of take stock of everything and see what we're doing. So it's been a 2.5 year effort so far, further than I was planning when we started. But yeah, so that's what the national academies do. We are not associated with them, but we are kind of borrowing that framework to do the same thing with the field of space architecture.
Hmm.
Um, so kind of taking stock of the field, figuring out where we are, where we want to go, and talking, not only to ourselves, but also to others about what it is we do, who we are, and again, like what the value added is. So this is hopefully going to culminate in a book. We've been working for about 2.5 years, which is longer than we anticipated, I think, at the start. But hopefully this year, we're going to wrap up the effort and publish a book that really captures what it is we're trying to do collectively as a profession and where we think we want to be going in the future.
That's exciting, and I'm glad that you landed here because, Stars Launchpad is a place for collaboration and people to connect with other people that you may not know you need me, but I need you, you know?
Yeah.
And we like to get people together so that they can accelerate their programs. We really appreciate you coming on. This is very interesting, Adam. Thank you so much. for
Yeah, of
sharing
course.
your
It's been
story
great.
and your journey. And I look forward to talking again in the future to find out what's exciting and going on. Okay.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you so much.
All right. Make sure you join us where we connect, collaborate, and accelerate. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you leave us a review and subscribe. Until next time, keep looking up. Thank you, Adam.
Don't miss an episode. Subscribe on your favorite streaming platform. Watch us on YouTube and follow us on social media. Stars Launch Pod, propelling us forward, one launch at a time.